Here we go, 9.1, aerobic respiration. We're doing this as a YouTube video because in class you're spending so much time doing practicals on it, we don't have the time to cover the theory as well. So here's our different descriptors of what you're aiming for. Here's a keyword, exothermic reaction. Of course, you know that respiration is an exothermic reaction because when you exercise, you respire more because you need to release more energy and you get hot, your faces go all red and sweaty because you've got that excess energy being released and you're trying to lose the energy from your body to maintain your enzymes at 37 degrees. So here we go, Mrs. Gren. Can you remember, this is going back to year 7. Just write the letters out, M-R-S-G-R-E-N, and write what each one stands for next to it. Remember, these are the 7 living processes of living things. So you will remember that movement, respiration, sensitivity, which just means you're able to respond to changes in the environment, growth, reproduction, excretion, which is different from egestion, and nutrition. Every living organism needs nutrients. So what does respiration look like? Well, you need to know it takes place in these things called mitochondria. The more active a cell, the more mitochondria there is, because this is where the whole process of respiration, aerobic respiration, takes place. So what happens is, going into there, we take glucose and oxygen, and then we give out carbon dioxide and water. That is aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration doesn't actually take place in the mitochondria at all. If you were looking under a microscope and you saw a cell with a lot of mitochondria, you might think it's a muscle cell, for instance. A fat cell, where it just is quite sedentary and just stores fat, just holds onto that fat, doesn't really do a lot, so you would find very few mitochondria. So let's have a look at some of the answers to these questions. So we've got A, name the chemical reaction that transfers energy from glucose. Well, that would be respiration, releasing chemical energy from the glucose and transferring it into a unit of currency that the body can use. The unit of currency that the body can use is called ATP. So we've got chemical energy moving to chemical energy in ATP. However, that creates some excess energy called heat energy, which we then need to lose from the body. B, state the word equation for respiration. If a question asks for the word equation, put the words in. If it asks for a symbol equation, put the symbols in. In this case, we've just got glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide and water. Next question, where in a cell does respiration occur? It occurs in the mitochondria. In a cell, you might have many mitochondria, and that would signify that that cell is very, very active and lots of respiration is going on. D, how does oxygen get to cells? Well, we know that oxygen enters the lungs, diffuses across into the blood capillaries, the arteries, move it around the body to respiring cells. Remember, in biology, we always talk about where things move from and where they move to. How does glucose get into cells? This is a bit of a GCSE lie, but basically we're saying that glucose diffuses into the cells from the blood. So from the blood into cells by diffusion. What type of reaction is respiration and why? It's a chemical reaction, we know that, but basically this question is asking you what signifies a chemical reaction as opposed to a physical reaction. Well, if you remember back to your year 8 days, physical reactions can be reversed, chemical reactions don't. And in this case, we can't make glucose back out of carbon dioxide and water in a human cell. So respiration is a chemical reaction because it just goes in one direction. And also we've got a new product at the end of it. We've got carbon dioxide and water, which are very different from glucose and oxygen. Here's a great question, and it leads on to kind of A-level thinking. And the question is, which cells contain the most mitochondria and why are they folded? So what happens with mitochondria? You've got a smooth membrane on the outside, and the inner membrane, because it's a double membrane, the inner membrane is highly folded. That gives the inside of the mitochondria a massive surface area. And the reason why you need a massive surface area is because the enzymes that drive respiration are located on its membrane. So lots of cells contain mitochondria, some more than others. Let's have a little look here. We have got red blood cells. Actually, you might think that they contain mitochondria, but we know back from our year 7 days that red blood cells have no organelles inside them. Nerve cells, they have quite a lot of mitochondria because they use active transport to pump ions in and out. And the sperm also has mitochondria because it needs to be able to rotate this tail so that the sperm cell can actually move. But by far, the cell that contains the most mitochondria is the skeletal muscle cell, because that needs to contract, and to contract that takes a lot of energy, and the energy is released by the mitochondria in the process of respiration. So what processes in our body do we need respiration for? Well, one of the things we need respiration for is to make new molecules. Let's remember that when you digest your food, you break it down into the most basic components. So carbohydrates are broken down perhaps into monosaccharides, which are glucose, fructose. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, and fats are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. And of course, once they're absorbed into the body, we need to build them back up. So these synthesis reactions of making new molecules take energy. We also need respiration to make our muscles contract. Now, before you heard me mention the word skeletal muscles, because not all our muscles are skeletal. For example, we've got cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is beating all the time. It's myogenic. It continues to beat even when you're asleep and you're not even thinking about it. It's not under our conscious control. So we need energy for that. We need energy for our digestive processes. Your stomach, the muscle around your stomach wall, is constantly churning to churn and mix your food. When you breathe, your rib cage lifts up and out and your diaphragm flattens. And of course, they are muscles that make those movements happen. So respiration can be said to make muscles contract. So stop the video for a minute and write down all those different examples that I just mentioned about muscle contraction that is powered by respiration. Okay, another thing that we use respiration for is to maintain a constant body temperature. If our environment is 20 degrees, we don't want our internal environment to become 20 degrees, because our biochemical reactions in our body are catalyzed by enzymes, and enzymes work at their optimum at 37 degrees. So it's beneficial for us to maintain our body temperature at 37 degrees. So what our body will do is it will kickstart some body reactions and generate heat to maintain that body temperature at 37 degrees. And in extreme conditions, it will force us to shiver, shivers are spasmodic reflex actions that make you contract your muscles, because by doing that, we're deliberately producing excess heat released from respiration. And the fourth reason I want to talk to you about why we need respiration, what we use respiration for, is for active transport. And of course, you know that we use active transport when we're moving ions from a low concentration to a high concentration against their concentration gradient. And this is really, really important in plants. For example, when they're moving ions in or out of their cells in the roots. And it's also very important in humans. We're moving ions into, for example, nerve cells. So this one, maintaining body temperature, is actually quite an important thing if you are a small organism like a mouse or a bird. Anything that's small has a large surface area to volume ratio, and that means that they lose their heat really quite quickly. So what they need to do is eat a lot of food to generate a lot of heat to stay warm. So you'll see these little rodents or birds, and they're constantly eating, they're constantly needing to nibble because they need to generate heat to maintain their body temperature. Okay, so we've had a busy lesson today. We did a lot of experimental work, and I wanted to give you exposure to a range of practicals that you might see in exam questions. So here's one that we did, and it shows a flask, an insulated thermos flask, and it's got boiled peas in there. And in this one, it's got just normal peas that have been soaked and are germinating. And what you found, they're sealed up at the top there with some plasticine, and a thermometer is in both. And what you noticed today was that the temperature on the peas one was higher than the one with the boiled peas. And we were talking about why is that. So just stop the video for a moment and write down the reason why we found that the peas here had a higher temperature than the peas there. Okay, so hopefully you'll remember from class today that with the peas here, we've got a higher temperature because these peas are germinating. And during germination, there's a lot of respiration taking place, and a byproduct of respiration is heat. So here we saw a temperature difference, only small, a couple of degrees, but there was a slightly higher temperature difference than with the boiled peas. The boiled peas didn't germinate because the enzymes in those peas had denatured. And so germination is clearly based on enzyme-driven processes, as is respiration. One other question I asked you about this today in class was, why did we soak both of the peas in disinfectant before we set this experiment up? And the reason why was because we could end up with a positive result in both. Because if there's bacteria on there, the bacteria might survive the boiling, and then they're going to be the bacteria will be respiring, and they might produce heat, and we might get a positive result on both of them. Okay, here's another experiment we did today. We used a cracker, we heated it, we gave it some initial energy to get it on fire. We found that it very, very quickly burnt. There was a lot of energy in that little piece of cracker. And we heated the water, and the water quickly began to boil. So stop the video for a moment and write down, what were we trying to show from this experiment? Well, we were trying to show that respiration and combustion of food is a very similar process. It's the same chemical process, because as we're burning the carbon and the hydrogen in here, energy is released, heat is released, and that's basically what's happening in the human body. Okay, here was the fun experiment that we did today. We looked at yeast, and with yeast respiring, they're producing carbon dioxide gas. As the carbon dioxide is escaping from the dough, it carries the dough with it. The carbon dioxide is less dense than air, and so that's how we get this rising effect here. And today I gave you some sugar and some yeast and some flour, and you guys just worked it out. But what I did say to you was you could easily get a question that was asking you to design an investigation into the rate of respiration, perhaps at different temperatures, or the rate of respiration, perhaps using different amounts of sugar. Now, if you were doing this experiment at different temperatures, then perhaps you would put your dough in a measuring cylinder, and then with every small rise, every small increment in the respiration, it would make a big difference on the calibration of the tube, and therefore would be able to plot some nice results on a graph. And of course, you would make sure that you had at least 5 different temperatures and possibly a control. The control would consist of the flour and water without the yeast. Here's our last experiment. You did a simplified version of this where you blew through a straw, and you saw that the carbon dioxide you were exhaling turned the lime water from clear to cloudy. Remember, in biology we always say where things go from and where they go to, and that signified that you were producing carbon dioxide. This is a slightly better setup. What it's doing is it's pulling you breathe in and you breathe out through it, and the air that you're breathing in gets pulled through one side, and the air that you're breathing out goes through the other. And you're able to see that if you breathe for long enough, even the air that you inhale contains some carbon dioxide, but it goes cloudy a lot later than on this side. So let's just flick back to our objectives and check that we've hit all those nails on the head. Our first objective was to recall the aerobic respiration, word equation and symbol equation. Well, I think we know that it's glucose plus oxygen gives us carbon dioxide and water. Describe how mitochondria are adapted to maximise aerobic respiration. Well, we said they can vary in number from cell to cell, and we also said that the inner membrane is highly folded, so it can hold a lot more enzymes for the process of respiration. And the last point was explain. Explain the importance of respiration. Well, we said to synthesize new molecules. Remember, you are what you eat. You can only build with what you've got, but the food that we obtain, we have to digest it into small soluble units, and only then when it's in the body, and maybe they go to the liver, do we build them up into larger molecules. Again, we need energy from respiration to do that. We said to maintain body temperature. We said that our body needs to be at 37 degrees to function effectively, because that is the optimum for our enzymes. We need to make our muscles contract, not just skeletal muscles, but cardiac muscles and our muscles that are involved in digestion. These processes carry on even when you're not consciously thinking about them, and they're constantly using energy. We also said we need energy from respiration for active transport. Active transport is really, really, really important. You learn a lot more about it at A level, but suffice to say, in plants who also respire, they need it to absorb magnesium ions, for instance, from the soil into their cell. And with humans, active transport is extremely important with our nerve cells, where we're moving ions in and out of cells. So there are 4 very important reasons why we need aerobic respiration in the body.